Hey you guys, it's your host Julian. This week is part one of a two-parter with veteran storyboard artist Paul Scarlata. In this episode we're talking all things King of the Hill, and next week we're going to talk all things regular show. If you haven't yet, you should check us out on Patreon. We're offering 3 tiers with a lot of fun perks. Some of those perks included in the 3 tiers are a special shout out to the patrons, question priority, early and ad-free access to the audio and video chats, voting on upcoming retrospectives, and so much more. We will be releasing our first Patreon exclusive video next week. Now, let's get on to my chat with the great Paul Scarlata. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to What's My Head podcast. I'm your host Julian, and today I'm joined by Paul. Paul, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How you doing, Julian?
Ah, fantastic, man. Favorite time of the day. It's a recording day, and we're talking King of the Hill, ladies and gentlemen. Paul here was a big factor on King of the Hill. So first things first, for the fans that might not know, what do you want to start with? You want to start your first day at Film Roman, or you want to start first day on King of the Hill? Where do you want to go from here?
They're one and the same, so I can start there.
Beautiful.
Yeah, King of the Hill was my first job out of college. I got out of college in '95 and worked part-time jobs for like 6 months. When I got out of college, I was like, well, I want to either do comics or I want to do animation. Animation seems like a little bit more of a sure thing. So I was like, well, it seems like it's all out in LA. So I packed my car up and go out to LA. Took me about 3 months to get this job. But on my first day, I wasn't technically, I was hired by Film Roman because they were the animation production company. But we weren't at the Film Roman location in North Hollywood. We started out for the first, I want to say, month or two, where the writers and producers were in Century City, at the Watt Plaza Towers. And my first day, I remember, just being in awe of being in this, professional environment. And we had talked earlier about, I'd been hired by Mike Wolf, and Mike, quoted me a salary that just blew my mind, because, by today's standards, it's not any great shakes, but back then, for a kid who'd been making, close to minimum wage, part-time jobs and shit, I was like, oh yes, of course I'm going to accept that money. And kind of settling in, and I got to meet, there was only like 5 guys hired at the time. I want to say Phil Hayes was one of them. He was a background guy, who's currently, I want to say, on Bob's, Wes Archer. I don't know if John Rice was there. I think that he might have come a little bit later. But yeah, just a few guys. And I got to meet Greg Daniels right away. And I didn't know really who he was, but he was just super kind and super nice and super welcoming. And just a really, really great guy. And so I remember that, and trying not to be overwhelmed. And the other thing that I distinctly remember is hearing cackling laughter echoing throughout the halls. And it was, I later found out it was Pamela, and I can't remember what her current name was. Adlin, yeah. She just would be laughing, and just half the day you just hear these brays of cackling laughter echoing throughout the halls. So that was kind of something that stood out to me, as a welcome to my time on King of the Hill. But yeah, shortly thereafter, Alan Jacobson got hired. Like, I want to say maybe a couple weeks later, and we shared an office. And yeah, we were there for about maybe 2 months, I want to say, before we, picked everything up and moved to the North Hollywood location, which is where we were for the rest of its run.
Now, I got to imagine it's probably a good sign. You walk in your first day, new smells, new sights, new people, new routines, new schedules. But I got to imagine walking in there and hearing entire laughter from everybody that's working there. That's got to be a great step in the right direction type of thing, man. When it's such a small crew like that, and you said there's only 5 of you guys, we were talking right before we hit record that, you were kind of paired with Wes right off the bat.
Right.
But before we get to Wes, man, I want to put a pin in that one just a second because you said you met Greg, pretty quickly right away. He's a really nice guy.
Yeah.
It's been said so many times, whether if you're watching a documentary, if you hear Mike Judge, ladies and gentlemen, talk about it, and anybody that's worked on it or had any kind of been in the same gravitational pull that Greg's in. They would say Greg was the heart and soul to that show. He built the world. Like anything that you loved, like I said, Mike created the show, but anything that you just fell in love with, chances are Greg had a hand in it, man. So what were some of those things that you might have learned from Greg that first day, or that whole tenure you spent at King of the Hill, man? Does anything stick out as far as I learned this from Greg, or I loved hearing this from Greg?
To be honest with you, I only had a handful of interactions with him, and it was mainly, like I said, before I, I really knew who he was. Like he would drop by my office, or we'd cross paths in the halls or something like that, and he was just always very nice and very welcoming. And later on, I ended up having some meetings with him, and I only met Mike Judge a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got hired, of course, I was familiar with Beavis and Butthead, both from the show as well as the shorts that were on like the Spike and Mike Sick and Twisted
Yeah.
festival animation stuff. So when I got hired, I was like, "Oh, a Mike Judge show, that, yeah, of course I
Yeah.
want to work on that show." And I knew very little about Greg, and both from personal experience, with what a kind guy he is, came to realize, with uh, kind of from a step removed, because like I said, I didn't really have much direct interaction with him. With my experience on the show later on, and then the shows that he was involved with afterwards, what a creative force he was
Mm-hmm.
at King of the Hill that I kind of didn't realize at the time. Because once we left the Century City office and went to Film Roman, unless you were a director who went down and had meetings or animatic reviews or that sort of thing, you were just completely removed from that stuff.
Yeah.
And you would, as an employee, you would just get a script, you get an audio track, and that's about as much interaction as you got. So it was very, couple steps removed. But so it's hard for me to say that I really learned something directly from
Mm-hmm.
Greg. I probably did from by osmosis, just
Yeah.
having worked on so many episodes and worked on that show for 7 or 8 seasons or whatever it was. But and the same with Mike. I had a couple meetings with him, and he was mostly working out of Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And like he, more often than not, when he was in a meeting, or it would be through a speaker on the table, and he would be calling from his studio in
Like
Texas.
Bosley.
Yeah, yeah, before the age of Zoom and
Yeah.
everything. But the couple meetings that I had with him were really cool because he was a legend already in
Yeah.
animation. I was a big fan of his and the work that he had done, and he was also very kind, very self-deprecating, and very complimentary of us. Like, this is me, a kid right out of school. This is my first job. And it was me and maybe 3 or 4 other people at the time. Shortly after I got hired, 3 people from UCLA got hired, and we're all in this meeting, and we're all kids right out of school. And he's like, you guys are talented. You guys can draw. You're gonna take my shitty drawings and you guys are the artists here. And I was like, oh man, you're a legend, Mike. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I think you're praising me too highly. You're praising us too high. But so they were both really kind, welcoming guys, and we're
Mm-hmm.
really, we're grateful that you're here. We're grateful for your talent, and we're happy to have you on the team. And but that was really it as far as interactions that I had with those 2 guys. It was just a couple of times at the very beginning of my run there. And,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, there is a guy that you spent quite some time with. Like I said, you were paired up, pretty quickly, pretty instantly. Was Wes Archer, man, and this is another guy that through every talk I've had with 5 or 6 of you guys that have worked on King of the Hill so far, they never, 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 and I'm not saying sell him short in the wrong way. It's like they can
Yeah.
never state enough just how important his vision was. Like he saw things differently. Like I've heard so many
Yeah.
great stories about it, man. So, I got to imagine you knew pretty quickly that this guy was special. This guy was good. You were in great fucking hands, is essentially what I'm getting at, Paul.
Mhm.
But what was it like working with Wes in those early days, trying to help build the world of King of the Hill, create these characters, and bring them to life?
Um, to be honest, that my first interactions with him were intimidating.
Yeah.
Like I knew that he was a super talented guy. I knew that he had worked on Simpsons for, he was one of the founding guys on The Simpsons.
Hmm.
And he had also done a short that had appeared on those Spike and Mike um, festival, Rad Boy and something or other. I can't remember what it was, but it was something that I had seen and knew about. Um, so he was already legendary, for me coming into it,
Yeah.
and him, running the show. And he's also a man of few words. Like
Hmm.
he thinks about what he's saying, and he, like you said, he envisioned that world. Just a fantastic creative talent. So initially, um, I was intimidated by him. I was like, wow, this I'm working with this amazing guy, he doesn't say a lot. So am I good? Am I not good? So I had a lot of respect for him, and still have a lot of respect for him. And it was a fantastic introduction to me into the world of animation, and being able to work with him, and a guy who was so talented and who had such a clear vision of what that world was going to be, both emotionally but as well as visually.
Hmm.
He helped to establish the look of the show, and which evolved a little bit. I'm sure how it evolved from season 1 to season 2 and 3. When the style kind of became a little bit more cemented. In the beginning, it was a little bit more rough and a little bit more
Yeah.
Beavis and Butthead-ish, and then it kind of cleaned up a little bit. But he was a core engine
Hmm.
creatively for the animation side of things, for sure. And like I said, he would think differently. So you would go in into his office and ask him questions or something, and he would think about it, and just come up with a clear, concise answer, because he knew what, had a clear vision of what the world was,
Yeah.
and what needed to be represented visually. Um, but yeah, he was an immense talent, and I was very fortunate to be able to start my career with him.
Talk about a foundation, man. If you need a foundation for anything that's going to be solid, you got Mike, Greg, and Wes.
Yeah.
God damn. You know what I mean? That's Hall of Famers right there when you look at animation. Any way you cut it, man. Hall of Famers right there. So,
I
uh,
got very, yeah, very
yeah,
fortunate.
it just goes and shows the testament of just the care and love that you guys put into this show. I mean, it starts at the top, rolls downhill,
Yes, for
both
sure.
good and bad. But this show, I've told you, the fans know how important this show was to me. When you start working on this show, did you know, being a kid right out of college, that this is going to be, this is not just Micah Judge show. It's not just a Greg Danish show. It's just not Wes Archer. Did you know just how important or how special this show was when you first started working on it, or it takes some time to kind of open your eyes a little bit?
It honestly did take a little bit of time to open my eyes to it. I mean, I had
Mhm.
faith that it would be um, something cool,
Yeah.
because of the pedigree of the people behind it. So I had an idea, like, oh, it's a Mike Judge show. Greg seems like he's a competent guy. Of course, Wes Archer has his history on The Simpsons, and is super talented. So I had an idea, but I didn't realize how loved and influential it would end up being.
Hmm.
Like how much it resonated with people, and how much people later on down the road said, "Oh, King of the Hill, one of my favorite shows of all time," and so influential to me, or like someone like you, said it had so much meaning for them.
Hmm.
I didn't initially appreciate the impact that it would have, and um, I mean, one of the early realizations that I had, and it was just a glimmer of kind of figuring out what the cultural impact would end up being. The first time after the first Christmas that I flew home
Hmm.
after starting working on I started working on the show in like April of 1996. And so that first Christmas, I remember being in the airport and sitting at the bar and having a burger or something, waiting for my flight, and looking at the TV above the bar, and a commercial for King of the Hill comes on, and
Oh,
I'm
that's
like,
so cool.
"Holy shit! It's real! It's a real thing!" It's
Yeah.
all the stuff that we've been doing behind the scenes for all this time, is finally coming out into the world, and it was a super exciting moment for me. And I just, from there, just people watching it, and like I said, coming back later on and saying how influential it was for them. It was pretty special.
Oh, I got to imagine, man. Like I said, I caught this one probably around season 3, 4. I'll say like 10, 11, somewhere around there. I can't remember the first episode I watched, but the I remember the first episode I ever watched. I knew that I was never gonna not see this show again. I've mentioned it, so the fans, I apologize. The whole before the animation domination block, man, it was generally 6 o'clock at like the height of The Simpsons, King of the Hill. You would see Family Guy in there, Bob's Burgers, American Dad. There would be a myriad of different shows. Futurama was in there for a little while as well, where it was 6 o'clock generally was when the new episode of King of the Hill hit, and then 5:30. They'd usually play the episode if it was during the new season. They would play the episode the previous week that was the previous episode. So I'd catch that one, and then so the first time watching the series, I watched it twice because I was watching the same episode, each week. I was watching, one episode twice a week is what I was getting at.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was very well versed in just the world, the mythology of these characters. It was just there was something so real about this show, and I draw this correlation so many times when I have you folks on. I told you before, King of the Hill and Hey Arnold really helped shape my moral compass, man. It showed me how to be a good person. When I was watching Hey Arnold, I was watching that when I was a younger kid. I still watch that show now, but it showed me how to be a good person at that kid age, that kid level, right? And then watching King of the Hill, that showed me the type of person I wanted to be when I got older, right? So there was sensibilities that I would take from every character from this show. I always saw myself more as a Bobby. I was a fat little chubby kid that tried to use humor as much as possible. I was very awkward like everybody is growing up in those teenage years, but I felt like that was the character. I love Dale. I love the conspiracy theories, even though I'm not too much into them. The only one I really believe in is the JFK one. And I don't even think
Yeah.
that's a conspiracy theory. I think that's pretty, it's pretty, I think everybody agrees on that one. We know who did it. We know where the smoking gun's at on that one, so, and you got Boomhauer, and you got all these idiosyncrasies from these characters, and you start pulling from them. And like I said, they helped mold and shift me. And then whenever I would think about something, I would take these aspects that I learned from these shows growing up, and I would put them into my everyday life. So these two shows, why I talk about these two shows so much, is because not one episode ever talked down to anybody. Obviously, King of the Hill was not made for a fucking 11-year-old at that time, right? It's a way different time than it is, or than it was then, than it is now for kids,
Sure.
but there was just something that was so special about that show. You can't quite put your finger on it entirely. The character seemed real. I told this to Alan Jacobson. It was like, if I could look at this and I didn't know, I close my eyes and don't know it's animation, I would think this is like everyday life for things. So it was something that, like I said, seemed so real to me. And like I said, I would take things from this show and I would incorporate them into my everyday life. With problem solving, issues with my friends, it talked about real world shit, and I didn't know it was talking about real world shit. So you guys pregame me, you guys trained me way before I knew I was getting trained on how to deal with certain things, man. So, like I said, this show was special to so many of us. Um,
Uh,
with how influential this show was, and you said you didn't really know, during that time with the first couple seasons you worked on it, just how important this show was going to be to everybody. Do you remember a moment that switch might have flipped where you're like, oh shit, we're doing something? You're obviously seeing the show for commercials in an airport when you're going back home. But do you remember a moment, an episode, or an interaction you might have had with somebody that was watching the show where you're like, oh shit, this is connecting with people?
I think the first time that I really realized that things, the show was connecting with people was a visit back home, and I was having, I think I was having dinner with some old high school friends,
Hmm.
and they started talking about the show and how they were watching it, and how cool it was that I was working on it. And I think before we started talking, I had mentioned that I didn't realize the wider, not just the wider impact of the show itself, but the work that I do.
Hmm.
I didn't really have as much of a sense of. And when I was talking with them, similar to how I felt when I saw the commercial at the airport. But this was, talking with people about it, who are watching it, and it's like, oh wow, the work that we do has an impact on people, and it means something to people, and they
Hmm.
enjoy it. And me in my cubicle, drawing on my light table all day, every day, is making its way out into the world and influencing people.
Hmm.
I liked that the show was smart. I liked that it didn't talk down to people. I liked that it skewed kind of adult. I liked that it had heart and a moral center. And talking with my high school friends, kind of was my first real um, indication, because I grew up outside Boston. So, I was visiting my friends in Boston, while I was working in LA. So I was on the other side of the country. I'm like, wow, people on the other side of the country are watching this, and also, it takes place in Texas. So I was wondering, would the kind of Southern thing, is that going to translate to people elsewhere in the country? And it had so much heart, was so well written, and came from such a universal place that that it did end up having this broader impact in this, and so that was kind of when I first started realizing the kind of human connection that the writing and the and you were saying about how it influenced you. I sometimes feel like animated shows can be a little bit more real even than live action shows. Like I think
Yeah.
you can kind of get away with talking with certain topics or talking a certain way about certain topics that is more real and that you can't really do always in live action. And I felt that way about King of the Hill and a bunch of other shows that I've worked on. Um, but yeah, it was really cool to see the fact that people liked what we were doing, and it felt really good. Still feels really good.
No, I got to imagine, man. Sidebar for just a second. What part of Boston are you from? My wife's family is all from Middleborough.
Okay, I'm from a town called Westboro, which is about 40 minutes due west of Boston.
Yeah,
Middleborough. I'm trying to remember exactly where it is. I mean,
that's a good question. I've only been up there once. That was it was literally, I think, 3 weeks or 4 weeks before the whole world shut down.
oh,
We went up. Yeah, we went up there, and it was really cool because I got to. What is the name of that sub place? It's like a chain place, but they said it was really good. They took me there. I had a steak and
Angelo's
cheese sandwich. Yes,
with
that was the place. Yeah,
yeah.
I went there, and then they took me to Mount Plymouth, and then it
Okay.
had I tried getting into the clam bellies and stuff like that. They got clam strips and shit,
Mhm.
and I love seafood. There's not one. That's going to be a lie. I was going to say there's not one thing that I don't like from the sea. Scallops. It's just they're so inconsistent. I work in the restaurant industry, so it's very. I don't want to. I work in a really good restaurant. So we're farm to table for a lot of our shit. We're sourcing the best protein we possibly can. A lot of our stuff from protein and produce are coming from farms. So I don't want to say it's like my ladies and gentlemen, I'm not bougie. I promise you I'm not stuck up. Denny's is still one of my favorite restaurants in the world. I love going there because I love breakfast food, man. So it's not like I just eat, high dollar food, but it's just like when I go and I get scallops, man, for the first 15 years of my life, every time I would order scallops, they would either be stone cold raw or they would be like chewing on leather. I never found somebody until the chef I worked for that like cooked them perfectly. I still don't really care for them because I've just got so many bad memories of eating shitty ones, so but they took me up there and we're out there and then I got my first lobster roll out there. And I'm not a huge lobster guy. I love crab way more. I'm from Florida. I'm from the South. So, crab is like supreme down here for me. And it's just like a Dungeness crab or not a blue crab, a snow crab are perfect. And they took me there. They got me these lobster rolls, which were fantastic. Put them on a Frankfurter roll and everything like that. but they give me these clam strips, excuse me, with bellies.
Yeah.
And then the first one I throw back, nothing but sand. I'm like, God damn it, this is disgusting. So like,
Yeah.
oh man, it happens every once in a while. They won't all be like that. I was like, all right, well, let me get another one. So I do it again. Same thing, sand. And I'm like, I think they're fucking with me. I think my father-in-law's messing with me. So he's like, all right, here. He's like, try it from try it from my wife. So I was like, grab a piece. I throw it in there and I'm like, oh, son of a bitch, these are all full of sand. I'm like, I'm not eating these anymore. So I love clams. I just I didn't like the clam strips with the bellies and stuff. So, but yeah, man, it was a beautiful city. It was cold as shit when we went up there. Not the coldest I've ever been. I went to Great Lakes for Navy boot camp in February. When I got off
Okay.
that, yeah, yeah. And I'm from Florida, right? I didn't know what a winter jacket for us is like a hoodie and maybe a beanie. When you need a real winter jacket, I had to borrow my father-in-law's, and he had been in Florida for 20 years or 15 years or whatever it was at that point. I can't remember how long, but he'd been in there for some time, so he hadn't needed a real winter jacket. So I get off the plane in Chicago, and I've got a windbreaker jacket. That was the winter jacket I had, and
Oh
then
man.
I had jeans that had holes in the knees. Ladies and gentlemen, it's starting to come back in vogue, so don't judge me. And then I think I was just wearing Vans slip-ons, so it was canvas shoes. I've never it I want to say it was like -15 or -13 with the wind chill factor.
Oh
I'd
man.
never seen snow, never seen snow. And then it was up to my hip, and I'm 6'2", so it was up to my hip. And I was
Oh
like, what
man.
the fuck is going on? I made a huge mistake. It was the
Right.
coldest I've ever been in my life. But nonetheless, man, we're talking King of the Hill. We're not talking sad Navy stories.
Yeah.
So I figured there was two episodes in particular. I said when you worked on this show that spoke to you in particular.
Right.
Those two episodes are Wings of the Dope, ladies and gentlemen. That's Buckley's Angel, and Naked Ambition, and that's the one, ladies and gentlemen, where Bobby sees Luann naked twice in a shot. And which one do you want to start with first? You want to start with Buckley's Angel? You want to start with Naked Ambition?
Why don't we start with Wings of the Dope?
All right,
I'm
man, let's cry. Let's get the crying out of the way first. I like it.
okay, cool, cool. And I think that chronologically, I think Wings of the Dope came before Naked Ambition, if
Yes,
I recall correctly, because
I believe it was the season prior.
yeah, because Wings of the Dope was directed by Cindy Tang, and I'm pretty sure Anthony Leoy was her AD at the time,
Hmm.
and Anthony directed Naked Ambition. So he had bumped up by the time I worked on that episode. But yeah, Wings of the Dope. I have a lot of those two episodes I remember quite a bit because I did a lot of work on them.
Hmm.
At the time, I was doing character layout animation, which is like keyframe animation, and I worked quite a bit with Cindy and with Anthony on Wings of the Dope, particularly for the trampoline stuff. So when Buckley's angel appears and he's bouncing on the trampoline, and Luann comes out and joins them, and they're bouncing, and he's bouncing slower and she's bouncing like normally,
Yeah.
uh, and he does the flip, and they're talking back and forth. I got to do all that stuff, and it was just really memorable and a lot of fun, and I put my heart into it, and it was a really heartfelt moment. And you said you just watched the episode recently.
Yeah.
The that song in a northern town.
Yep.
It
I
gets me
wrote that
every
down.
time. Yeah, yeah,
Yes, it does.
it does.
I
And
was,
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think we were talking earlier about us both watching it recently, and I said I was watching it with my son, and when that song came on, and those moment, that moment,
uh-huh.
I was like,
Yeah.
hold back tears, because it's a moving scene, and it's a moving, it's a great moment in the episode, and also all the memories that I had of working on it. And I think I may have mentioned to you that afterwards, Cindy, and just such a sweet gesture, gave me a cell from that episode, because at the time, every season, I can't remember if it was Film Roman or if the one of the overseas animation studios would give them a cell in the background,
Mhm.
and the one that she got that year was of Buckley and Luann hovering above the trampoline, and she gifted it to me, and
Mhm.
it was just such a sweet, meaningful gift for me. So that's another reason why the episode stands out for me. I've got it on my wall. I think I sent you a picture. Um, But yeah, lots of great memories about that. And it sounds like it affected you too.
Man, oh man. So I haven't cried on this podcast in the last couple weeks, so I figured, fuck it, we're talking King of the Hill and Death. Let's talk. We're gonna a little deep on this one, ladies and gentlemen. Let me get some
Sure, sure.
swig of some tea real quick. But yeah. So I got some notes on this one. So usually whenever I got one of you guys coming on, I'll go and watch whatever episodes you guys say meant the most to you, and I'm taking notes and I'm texting myself so I can remember. One thing that stuck out before we get into the sentimental things, and I don't know how I didn't notice this before, but it said written by Johnny Hardwick. And ladies and gentlemen,
Yeah.
Johnny is the voice of Dale Gribble, our favorite conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
And what I did not realize was how much he wrote for this show. Whenever I think of, and I think it was just a fact of me just either not fully watching the credits. Ever since I started doing this podcast, this podcast was born out of watching the credits of one movie in particular. It was I'm a huge Ninja Turtles fan. I've got them all over my body. I've got them hanging up all over my wall up here. It's that's what brought me into pop culture was the Ninja Turtles, man. That first movie, the 1990s live action movie from the Jim Henson Productions, was
Ah,
my introduction into, oh my God, this is I will fight anybody on this one. That first movie is perfect. It is grunge, it is film noir, it is beautifully shot. There is so many scenes in there is so beautiful. But I digress. It was just out of me looking up at credits and seeing why don't I know that guy's name? And then Googling that guy's name, finding out he lived 45 minutes from where I grew up. I didn't know him. And he was the whole reason that the Ninja Turtles got made because he sees this comic book in Detroit. He goes and he says, his name is Gary Proper, ladies and gentlemen. You've heard the story before. He goes to a comic book store in Detroit. He sees the Ninja Turtles, the first issue. He goes to all of these studios and he says, this is the next thing. And he got laughed out of every single studio. Nobody who's gonna fucking watch Turtles. Come on, man. Be serious. He was actually, I believe he was the manager or agent. I can't remember which one. That's one and the same. But for the original Gallagher, Gallagher won the actual twin or the first twin. But he kept going. He's like, no, this is the next one. This is the next one. So he could get with his partner. He's like, this is the next movie. It took a few years, took like 4 years before anybody would take him serious. And then the 87 cartoon blew up. The toys you couldn't get anywhere for Christmas that year. So everybody started saying, we got to do this movie. We got to do this movie. Find out, like I said, 45 minutes down the street from me when I was growing up. Then I find out he passed away. I just happened to read an article about him, and then I see the writer that did it for the Daytona Beach News Journal, the New Smyrna News Journal, whatever it was. I look up his name, and he has his phone number there. I'm like, huh, let me just call this guy. That led to one thing. That led me going here, led me to talking to this person, and then eventually I have this podcast. So the credits led me to what I'm doing now with you guys, giving you guys your flowers, telling you thank you for making such a huge part of my life that much better, right? Without these shows, without these movies, my life sucks, man. These things brought so much joy and they continue to bring so much joy, so I don't know why, going back to my whole previous point, was I don't know why I just happened to look up this last time watching the series through and I see Johnny on there. And I'm like,
yeah.
huh, I wonder if Johnny has a brother and his name is Johnny too. And I just look it up and he's like, no, it's a lot of the stuff. I don't know if his title was lead writer or head writer, but I know he fucking last 12 or 13 episodes I've watched because I keep jumping all over the place. He's had like a total of 6 or 7 the last couple ones I've watched. I'm like, God damn, this dude wrote a lot. So
Yeah.
knowing what I know about just Dale Gribble and the voice and the life that he breathed into that character, which is phenomenal. He's such a phenomenal character. But to know that this dude wrote these scripts and was in a writer's room bouncing these ideas off, man, I just thought that was the first thing that struck me watching this episode was Johnny Hardwick wrote it. You hit on the song. That song is forever. Every time I hear that song, I close my eyes. I'm seeing Buckley. I'm seeing Luann jump. It's burned in my mind. It's burned. It'll never. It's like one of those core memories. It'll never go away. Um, you know,
Just
there was a
associate.
line in there that I thought was beautiful, but we'll get to that one because it'll kind of ruin the whole thing. It was the interaction between Bobby and Hank at the end of the episode. But what was beautiful about this show, this episode in particular, when I'm a kid, I lose my first dog very young, right? And it wasn't until I saw a movie called All Dogs Go to Heaven, Don Bluth Studios, John Pomeroy, Charlie B. Barkin, all of these characters, that it made me like, oh, okay, my dog, I don't believe like religion. We can completely just steer clear of this, but I mean, I still don't believe that there is, whatever it is. I don't know if it's the traditional thing that everybody says. I'd be ignorant to say, or I'd be very brash, I can't think of the word I'm trying to use, to think that I know what comes after life, right? But I remember seeing this and being okay with my dog passing away. I was still very sad, but I was very like, it felt like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. Like, oh, he's in a better place right now. He's going to be okay. He's no longer here. I'm sad that he's no longer here, but he's okay. Then you flash forward a couple years and you guys rip my heart out of my chest again, right? So I had just lost my granny, the one lady that was like always a constant in my life. She went to a nursing home. She was married to my grandfather for so many years, and then we lose my grandfather, and then she essentially goes crazy, because when you're married to somebody for 45, 50 years, and that person is no longer there, you tend to deteriorate pretty quickly, so she goes, and then that was, like I said, that was my first real brush with death. And then I see this episode, a couple years later. And then I remember seeing, you grow loving these characters, Buckley included. He's that dipshit that, just you don't want your daughter to date, but he's got his flaws, he's got his perks, he's a flawed character, man. He's a great character. He's not black, he's not white. He's very in the middle with a whole bunch of different things. And then, like I said, you see, Luann going through it. And then I look at Luann, and like I said, this is where it brought the emotional attachment into it. She was so distraught, that it happened the season prior, or earlier in that season. So she went through the fucking ringer with this one. And I look at that and I put the baggage that I think my grandmother would have went through, my granny would have went through with losing my grandfather. And I think, man, I wonder if this is what my granny was feeling. I wonder if she was going through the same shit that Luann was going through. And I start looking at this, and this is just a 12, so this is a very base knowledge. So flash forward to as an adult, and you see this, and at 100%, you lose somebody that was so special to you. And then you have this opportunity to have them back, whether it's psychosomatic or whether it actually happened. Who fucking knows? Who gives a shit? Because if it's real to you, it's real. I don't care what anybody says. If it's real to you, it's real. You see Buckley coming back, ladies and gentlemen, and he's interacting with Luann, because Luann's at that period of her life where she doesn't know if she really wants to be a hairdresser. The girls, probably the first, you guys created the Mean Girls before the Mean Girls created the Mean Girls. Just a bunch of horrible people, man, treating her like shit, telling her, oh, your boyfriend blew up, your hair fell out, and just a real assholes to this lady, for no reason. Luann's a sweet person, and you see her really struggling, the loss of Buckley. And then she sees Buckley, and that whole song, like, I'm trying not to cry, man, that whole song with them jumping, and then they're starting to come back, and then that eye contact they make, and then you see that weight was lifted off of her shoulders, kind of like that weight was lifted off of my shoulders with my dog, right? You see that, and then you see her stressing about this shit. So she's going through this whole episode where it's do I do this? Do I stay stagnant? Do I grow? Do I leave? Do I evolve? So it was just this dichotomy that she was going through. And then you see the resolution of her saying, fuck beauty school. I don't want to do this. And then you see her essentially letting that piece of her life that happened, that horrible part of her life, go. And you see the relaxing, you see her shoulders relax, not really, but you just see like I said, you see the weight of the issues going away from Luann. And then this is the moment where it hits the most, because I look at this, being a dad, being a husband, being a brother, I mean, not so much being a brother or, being a son and shit like that, because once you get older, in my opinion, you got your family, but you've created a family, and then it's your responsibility to make sure that family progresses. But, seeing that, one day I'll no longer be here for my 3 kids. I'll no longer be here for my wife. I'll no longer be here for my dogs, maybe, it's just, you see all of this shit. And as an adult, as a father, as a husband, this episode hits so much deeper. And you guys got me every fucking time with that song, every single time, man. Like, the eyes get all glassy, man.
Me too.
That's enough word vomit for me. So, ladies and gentlemen, I apologize, man. You worked on this show. I just had to tell you, just like I said, how important this episode was to me, how much I needed this episode as a kid, how much I don't need this episode as an adult now because I'm tired of being this sad. But I'm so glad it's there. And like I said, I think it is, if I can take 5 episodes that I would give somebody and say, if they ask me like, what would you say is so good about King of the Hill, I would give them this. This is one of the 5 episodes I would give somebody and say, this is everything you need to know about this show. This is heart encapsulated in 22 minutes, 30 minutes if you want to count commercials. This is everything a show should be and is because of folks like yourself. So I would love to know, man, what at what point did you know that this show, you said it was an emotional show for you, man, but at what point, when you're looking at shots, how are you doing the pacing? What are you looking for as far as trying to tell the story that you ended up telling with a couple other guys and gals that worked on this show, man? But what are these scenes? What are these episodes? What are these shots that really stuck out the most to you, man?
Well, for a long time, I mean, in the beginning, I was doing character design. I did the character design for about a year, and then moved on to character layout. And like I said, it's all about doing key poses for the animation and stuff. And as a character layout artist, you would get the script, you would get the audio track on a cassette tape,
Mhm.
and you would get did I say the script? The script, the audio
Yes.
track, and you have all the designs and stuff. And as a character layout artist, keyframe animator, you're basically trying to do justice to the storyboard. So
Mhm.
you get the storyboard as well, and you try and make sure that the background perspective is correct, and the characters are placed in their environment well, and you're doing the acting well. But once you kind of get all that technical stuff kind of worked out, then you're really diving into the emotions of the
Mhm.
characters, and you're really trying to convey it with their facial expression, with their poses, with the acting that they go through. So you have the voice acting. In the case of that episode, you have Brittany Murphy, and I can't remember who the actor who did Buckley, but you have those voice performances, and so you're trying to do justice both to the storyboard and to the voice performance. And so I would get really into the emotions of the characters and everything that they were going through, and really do my best to try to convey that visually. And
Mhm.
and that, I think, is the part of the most rewarding part of the process to this day, for me, is trying to convey the emotions of the characters in the scene, kind of do justice to the script, do justice to the voice acting, and really sell that. And I felt like, for those scenes on that episode, Wings of the Dope, it was already so rich, and it was
Mhm.
so heartfelt, and moving, that it was just my job not to drop a ball. And I needed to do it justice, and put my heart into it. And you do that with the the main characters that are involved in the scene. But another fun thing for me, sometimes you'd have to do crowd scenes, and
Mhm.
one of my least favorite, and I know a lot of people's least favorite parts about both storyboarding and character animating, is doing crowd scenes. And the upside and the fun part of that too is you can tell little stories with the characters in the background there. Like you can sneak in, a character doing something, or having a little facial expression, or having an interaction or something. Uh, and so it's always a lot of fun inhabiting the emotions of the characters that you're drawing, because you're really the performer. You're
Mhm.
like you're riffing off of the voice acting, but you're really getting the characters to go through their emotions and emotions. And I think I went on a tangent. I'm trying to remember what your original question was, but
Oh,
that for me is the most rewarding part of being involved in a show like this. And it's particularly great when you get a really well written moment,
mhm.
or assignment that has those great moments, and you can really sink your teeth into that, and get lost in the emotions of the moment, and of the characters.
When you go back and you watch this, obviously, you worked on this so many years ago. And then you've got, kind of like I do, you've got these eyes that are from one, you've got perspective now because you're a little bit older. Two, you've got a kid. So you're looking at this a lot differently, like I was looking at it. Do you think there's a moment for you particular that you think drives home? I don't want to say it's like the best part of the episode, but what I'm getting at is what do you think the best part of this episode, or what scene can you sum up this episode with?
Um, I think it is that. I mean, I had for I had forgotten the story about Luann's, the test at the beauty academy and the
Hmm.
Mean Girls and all that sort of stuff. And I had when I watched, I was like, oh yeah, I remember all this, and not just remembering it, but like um, Joel Adams was one of the character designers at the time, and I'm like, oh, those are Joel designs, So I was remembering Joel, and I was remembering all the all the little interactions that I had with other people, and you know, so I had forgotten about all that stuff. But the stuff that really uh, sticks in my mind when I think about the episode is that interaction with Luann and Buckley, and
Hmm.
when she realizes that she's in her room and she hears the trampoline and she sees out the window and comes out and has that first interaction with him. And she says what, and he says chicken butt, and
Yeah,
I remember all that stuff. And she gets up and starts talking to him, and oh, Buckley's Angel, and yeah, my name, don't wear it out, or I can't remember what it is, but
yeah, that's what he
all
says.
the lines. It's like, I was so into those scenes when I was working on them that
Hmm.
it all comes right back. And so just those scenes in particular, where she's interacting with him, and he does the flip to show his wings, and
Yeah.
they're bouncing. And I remember talking with Cindy about the fact that he bounces slower and she bounces at her regular rate. And um, those parts of the episode stick out so much to me that I had forgotten the whole other subplot of the beauty academy stuff and her deciding to do
Hmm.
community college at the end and everything. So remembered that when I just recently rewatched the episode. But yeah, the trampoline stuff is what sticks out to me the most.
Oh, absolutely. That is, as the kids like to say, that's the scene stealer still. So I've got a couple more things that I want to hit on for this one, and then we'll move on to the next one, man. Uh, Probably my I don't want to say favorite scene because that trampoline is hands down my favorite scene in this whole episode. However, favorite lines of dialogue, I got two, man. Peggy, how do I say this without coming off like a dick? Oh, I don't understand the hate for Peggy that most people have. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
she's just one of those characters. Like everybody knows a mom like Peggy. Like their kid is
sure.
their everything. She tries her hardest. She's so determined. I like Peggy, man. Reddit is a
Yeah,
weird place to go down, especially for the King of the Hill Reddit, or
yeah, yeah.
subreddit, excuse me, because you always see somebody just bagging on Peggy, and I just don't, I don't, I've never understood it, man. There's not a character that I don't like. There's not a character I hate. I love every single one of these characters. I've got bias when I look at the show because I think it's a perfect show. But like I said, Jesus's love is still one of my favorite things. Her just blowing the hair, the hair dryer in her ear, and Hank comes by. He's like, "Oh man, you're hearing Jesus's love again," and she's like, "Jesus is love," and then her hair sticking up. I love that scene, or that line. But my favorite piece of dialogue in this entire episode, excuse me. It's at the end of this episode where Luann decides to go back, and then Bobby, Peggy, and Hank are all sitting down at the table. They're all drinking. It's nighttime and shit. And I'm trying to look for it. I wrote it down on my phone. Oh, here it is. Hank goes, I didn't know there was a wiener wagon was stopping by in Arlen. And then you see Bobby. He looks like the skeptical snake, so his eyes are really squinting. He stands up and he's like, obviously not, or you would have taken me. So anytime Bobby can throw some shade like that, I absolutely love. And one thing in particular that I don't think I've talked about enough as far as King of the Hill goes, I know I've talked them to death when it comes to this show. I love backgrounds. Backgrounds are absolutely my favorite. My favorite thing about animation. Like everybody loves the characters, everybody loves story. I absolutely love the world building. I love the color palette that was chosen for King of the Hill. Anytime there is a nighttime shot, so that purple, that pink, that blue, you see it in the trampoline scenes.
Yeah,
I pause it and I go, whoever did this fucking thank you, because this is a masterpiece. It could be nothing going on. You could see a trash can in the background. I don't give a shit. I see those colors. I see the backgrounds. I see the shots you guys take where you zoom out, you zoom out, and you zoom out, and you see just the landscape of suburban Ireland, you know? It's just so beautiful. It's second to none when it comes to this, man. But those are the two lines in particular that I absolutely love this episode about. You know, it's just Bobby. Anytime, like I said, anytime I can get some funny Bobby in there, anytime I can get some very heartful Luann, because on the outside, people see Luann. She's this very attractive young lady, right? She might be considered ditzy to some people, but she's so much heart. She's so much soul. She is that person that you root for because you see where she comes from. You see the horrible life she had with her mom and her dad. You see that abuse, right? And then you see somebody that's really trying to make something for herself. So like I said, to see her get a win in this after taking so many losses, I think it paid off so well. You guys could have fallen on this one. Like, it could have been a shitty episode and be like, see, this is why Luann sucks. But you guys absolutely crushed this episode. You guys you stuck the landing. It was a 10 out of 10, even from the Russian judge or the French judge, whichever one, gives the shitty scoring and those tropey movies. Yeah, love this one. The next one, and we're Luann centric today. The next one is going to be Naked Ambition, which, as a young man, this one was a fun one because we've all kind of went through something like this first time we saw somebody naked. Not so much my cousin, because I didn't want it. It's my cousin, and two, I didn't really hang around my cousins, but nonetheless, man, Bobby, they're all at the waterhole, the lake, Con, all of them, Bill, everybody from Rainy Street is there, enjoying a nice day out. And then at the end of it, Bobby ends up seeing Luann naked and then pisses Joseph off because Joseph wanted to see it naked. Now, before we dive deep into this episode, what I thought is so topical about this show, there's two things in particular about King of the Hill that I've noticed have been topical then, maybe not so much then as it is now, right? So with 30 years of hindsight looking at it, you see Connie start to feel very subconscious about her body because Luann looks a specific way. Connie is a young, pre-pubescent adolescent girl. They might be going through puberty. I don't really know. I can't remember when I went through it. They're in middle school, so they might be on the cusp of puberty. But you see her starting to feel very uncomfortable with how she looks compared to Luann. And so you start to see her comparing that, right? Now, you can draw correlations in 2023 with social media, with filters that women use and men use too, and then people consistently judging what somebody looks like in their perfect moment that's been photoshopped, that's been edited. So that was something that I thought was very, very poignant. And obviously you guys aren't really thinking social media 30 years ago. But looking at that in hindsight, like I said, you've got adult eyes now, you got dad eyes now. So you see that moment. I thought that was like, man, this is something that I think this episode can air now. And I think it would have a very big, I don't want to say following in the wrong way, but I think it would be, I think people would look at this episode a little differently than other than it's just, it's a hot chick getting shown this one. You can draw, like I said, a lot of correlations to today's age with this episode, man. But why was this one? Obviously, we talked about Wings of Dope. You did that beautiful sequence with, him and Luann and jumping on the trampoline. But why was this one the one that was just right here in your head when you gave me those two episodes?
For multiple reasons. Partly, and to a lesser, I'll tell you the lesser reason before I get to the greater reason. It is, and maybe the reason why it's two Luann-centric episodes is because I thought Brittany Murphy was great, and I had the opportunity to dance with her at one of the premiere parties.
Yeah, that's cool.
So that was a really memorable thing. So I was, a Brittany Murphy fan from then on. It was maybe it was either the first season premiere party or the second season premiere party, and this was like 97 or 98 or something like that. And swing dancing was a thing back then. And, I used to like going swing dancing with my friends, and I remember swing dancing with a friend's friend, I think, at some point. And out of nowhere, the next song comes on. Brittany comes up and grabs my hand and says, "You know how to dance? Let's dance." And I was like, "Okay, Brittany Murphy, sure." And we didn't swing dance, but we just kind of like grabbed each other's hands and spun in a circle and looked into each other's eyes, and you
Yeah.
know, like and afterwards, I was starstruck, and I was having a moment with Brittany Murphy, and then a friend of mine jumps up and kind of got in between us, and I was like,
What a dick.
no, damn it, hey, cockblock. um, and I was talking with Anthony Leoy about this not long ago, but there was a picture of all of us, like with me and Brittany and everybody else, and I ended up giving it to her.
Hmm.
And he's like, "You idiot! Why didn't you keep that picture? Why'd you give her that picture?" Like, yeah, it was dumb, but I wanted her to have it, and But anyway, so ever since then, Luann and Brittany Murphy had a place in my heart, and so I
Yeah.
I loved working on Luann stuff. Um, but for that episode for Naked Ambition, um, I remember distinctly because I got to do all the water skiing stuff.
Mm.
And Anthony was the director, Robin Brigstock was the assistant director, and I want to say it was Robin's boards that I was working off of. But I got to animate the water skiing both with the backgrounds in the water,
Hmm.
which I referenced. I had a bad VHS copy of Porco Rosso, Miyazaki movie,
Yeah.
and there's such beautiful water animation in that movie because there's a lot of seaplanes and a lot of splashing water and stuff. So I referred to that, and I kind of lifted, all the water animation from Porco Rosso. Um, but even more fun was the fact that I got the bouncing boobs scene, and I animated the shit out of those.
Oh, I can imagine.
uh, yeah, lots of research, lots of time, lots of effort, and one of the crowning achievements of my animation career, right there. Um, it was a lot of fun, and I think there was a season or two where I moved up to San Francisco, and then I moved back and got back on King of the Hill, and I think I missed the premiere party for that episode, and I think they screened that and gave Anthony an award, because the producers loved it or something. Um,
Hmm.
but I missed out on that party because I wasn't there. But getting to animate the wind, water skiing, the bouncing boobs, and the water effects,
Hmm.
I had a great time with it. It was a lot of fun, and it definitely stands out as um, a key moment in my time on King of the Hill.
Yeah, it's a
So
core memory
very,
for sure.
yeah.
I've actually got Anthony coming on, not this week or not next week, but the following week. So I'm talking to him in a couple weeks.
Awesome.
Um, yeah, man, I'm looking forward. Like I said, anytime I can talk to any of you guys, man, I gotta. So when I first started this podcast, man, I don't know if you watch the or if you. I noticed a lot of you guys. Some of you guys won't watch the stuff you make, and then some of you guys just see it as a job. Like you guys love your job, but they don't really watch a lot of animation when you're not at work because you're dealing with animation all day. But
Yeah.
there was a show called Ed, Ed and Eddie on Cartoon Network, man. And when I first started this show, I did a deep dive into almost the entire studio for AK, every board artist, every writer. I had almost all of the voice actors on there, so I did a deep dive on that show or that series,
Awesome.
and then I'm doing the same thing with you guys. I mean, the first guy I had on that had, and I want to get him back on because one, he's getting up there in age, and two, he's just such a wealth of knowledge. But I had Phil Roman on my show
Oh, cool.
first year, second year, whatever it was, and we talked primarily Grinch because I know that's one thing he wanted to talk about because it stuck out so much to him, getting to animate with Chuck Jones and then Chuck Jones looking back at him and telling him he's an animator. He's like, my hero called me an animator, so we dove deep into the Grinch and I want to get him back on. And we go a little bit more in detail with the King of the Hill stuff. But yeah, anytime I can get any of you guys on, man, it's a blast. Because like I said, you guys had such a huge part of my childhood, and now in my adulthood, I'm trying to get my kid into it now. Because we'll sit down and we'll watch a couple episodes when I'm cooking dinner or something like that. It's on the background, and then we talk about it, shit like that. But one of the main things that stick out to me in this episode is there was always two or three stories within a story for almost every episode. And I thought that was one, it was brilliant. Two, if you, this just goes to the staff from cast to crew and everybody in between. It just goes to show you how intelligent, how smart, and how fucking good you guys are at your job. One story for 30 minutes is already hard enough. Then you weave in 2 extra stories, and that's on the low count. You know, sometimes you got 3, 4 stories in there for a character that you will only see maybe 2 more times throughout the series, right? So how you guys masterfully wove 2 or 3 stories into 22 minutes, and then everything ended and everything stuck perfectly, I'm always just amazed by. But the whole gang getting taken in for mental health, or not, what was it, not mental health, excuse me, what was it, shit, what is that thing called? They
The yoga one, right? Or is
no,
that-
it's the same episode in Neck and Ambition. Boomhauer ends up floating down the so they all end up in the mental hospital, or the psych ward, excuse me, that was
That's
the
right.
term
That's
I was
right.
looking
That's,
for.
yeah.
So there's so, like I said, there's so many stories. You've got Boomhauer going down, getting locked up because he's burnt to shit because he spent the entire time on the lazy river drunk. He ends up in downtown Dallas or whatever it was, or downtown Arlen. So he's fried up. He doesn't know where he's at. He ends up getting, into it with the cop, head cut off, man. And then they throw him into a psych ward. And then he calls Dale, of all people to fucking call, because you don't want Hank to know, right? Dale's not on the top of my list. I'm calling Peggy at the very least, or I'm calling Nancy, but he calls Dale. And then my favorite line in this line of dialogue in this one is when he's like, yeah, of course, I won't tell Hank, and he hangs up. And then Dale's sitting there with his pet turtle. And he goes, all right, I need a kiss before I can leave. And then he goes, the turtle sucks his head back in, and he sucks his arms back. And he's like, oh, come on now. And he goes, and he's like, I can destroy you. And he's telling a fucking turtle, yeah, that I can destroy you.